ישראל יש להם חלק לעולם הבא שנאמר בעמך כולם צדיקים לעולם ירשו ארץ נסר מטעי מעשה ידיי להתפאר שמעון הצדיק היה משיירה כנסת הגדולה הוא היה אומר על שלושה דברים העולם עומד על התורה ועל עבודה ועל גמילות חסדים. רבותיי, at that time of the year where we have the custom to study the Pirke Avot, which is Minhag Yisrael. We've been doing this for many years. Our Thursday night class shifts to the study of the Pirke Avot every week. We study, at least we try to study one Mishnah from the chapter of the week. Tonight, we're beginning Perek Aleph. The Mishnah that I chose is Mishnah Bet. The author of the Mishnah is Shimon HaTzadik, who besides being one of the last members of the men of the Great Assembly, also was Kohen Gadol. Shimon HaTzadik makes one of the famous and common statements from Pirkei Avot that we know. He used to say that the world stands on three pillars. And the three pillars that the world stands on, and some explain that the world was created because of these three pillars. Ala Torah, that's the study of Torah. Ve'ala avodah. Avodah is vague, literally means work. We'll have to see what it means. Ve'al gemilut hasadim, and acts of kindness. Avodah, the she comes along and explains in his Perush, and I quote, he says, Ala avodah. He avodat korbanot bebet hamikdash. So avodat referring to service. What service? The service of the sacrifices that were brought in the temple. V'shematzinu b'maseket ta'anit. V'Yisrael sheboto mishmar mitkansin ba'alim v'kulim ma'aseh bereshit. Amar Rabbi Yaakov baraha. Amar Rabbi Yosel ma'alem ha'amadot lo nitkaymu shamayim va'aretz. So the Gemara tells us that the world stands in the merit of these sacrifices that were brought. The only problem is, today we don't have sacrifices and we don't have a temple. So therefore, it seems that avodah does not apply. It seems the world is missing a pillar. Torah we still have, Baruch Hashem. We still have yeshivas. Gemilut Hasadim, acts of kindness. We still have Jews that are benevolent and kind. But avodah, if it means the service in the Beit HaMikdash, I must tell you, then the world is missing the pillar. It's not my opinion, by the way. I actually found that that's what the Gaon Mevilna says. The Gaon Mevilna, he has a Perush in a Sefer called Imre Noam, on the Gemara Berachot, page 8. So he comes along and he says that even though some want to say, and it's Rabbeinu Yonah actually, that avodah was replaced with tefillah. Prayer took the place of korbanot. And there's proofs to that. Because the pasuk says, and you should serve God. So you see, and that's referring to prayer. So you see that tefillah is referred to as avodah. It also says that the prayers were established corresponding to korbanot. The morning prayer corresponds to the morning sacrifice, to olat tamid. The afternoon prayer is the afternoon sacrifice, and arbit is the bones and the fats that were burned on the mizbeach. So there is a correlation between service in the temple and service in the synagogue. So the Gaon of Vilna says, although there are those that say it, he wants to come along and say that mikol makom ikar yesod ha'avodah bebet hamikdash akravat hakorbanot. The real avodah is in the Bet HaMikdash, and therefore he says ve'al ken en kiyum ha'olam talui ata ela b'shnei yesodot. He wants to say that really the world only has two pillars, Torah v'gemilut hasadim. Avodah, unfortunately, has been taken away from us. And he brings a proof to it. It's a big hadush of the Gaon. He brings a proof. The Gemara says in Sanhedrin on page 98. They asked Rabbi Elazar, what should a person do to save himself from the times of Mashiach? Of time before Mashiach comes, there's going to be difficulties. They call it the birth pains of the Mashiach. So they asked Rabbi Elazar, what should a person do in order to relieve himself from these birth pains? So the Gemara says two things. Learn and do acts of kindness. So the Gaon of Vilna says, what happened to Avodah? So he says, from there you see that already, that at the times before Mashiach, not going to be Avodah. Because Avodah is only in the Beit HaMikdash. And therefore he writes that we should connect ourselves to these two principles. The principle of Chesed, which is Keneged Avraham Abinu, and the Torah, which is Keneged Yaakov Abinu. The Mefarshim asked the following question on the Mishnah. This is from the Midrash Shemuel, Rabbi Shemuel the Ozida. His question is, Torah is represented by Yaakov Abinu. Yaakov Ishtam Yoshev Ohalim. Chesed is represented by Avraham. Avraham Isha Chesed. So why does the Mishnah put it out of order? Why does the Mishnah put Torah first and Gemilut Hasadim last? If it's going in order, it should say Gemilut Hasadim, Avraham, Avodah, which would be Yitzhak, which was a Korban, and then Torah. So the Mishmur, this is an incredible concept. He says that we would not know how to do Avodah and Gemilut Hasadim if it wasn't for Torah. You need Torah to tell you how to do Chesed. Chesed is not something emotional, something that you think that what's to be done. There's parameters: how much tzedakah to give, who to give to, when to give, etc. Who has precedent in Chesed? Who goes first? Who goes second? What's the order? There's rules, and there's rules, of course, in Korbanot. The person cannot just bring any type of sacrifice. Or today we have Hilchot Tefillah. So therefore, the prerequisite before we get to Avodah and Gemilut Hasadim, it's got to start with Torah. It's got to be a Torah-based Avodah, Torah-based Gemilut Hasadim. That's what the Mishra de Ozida says. Tonight I came to discuss Avodah, the hardest of the three. Especially when I saw that the Gaon said that the pillar doesn't exist anymore. So I came to try to make a deeper analysis of Avodah. And keep in mind, we have 18 or 19 berachot in the Amidah. One of the berachot of the Amidah is called Birchat Avodah, which is the berachah v'retzeh. So in the Tefillah itself, we have a special berachah that's dedicated to it. So therefore, I'd like to make the proper iyun on this subject. No coincidence. The parasha that we read is Parashat Shemini. The calendar this year was a regular year, was not a leap year. Shulchan Aruch tells us exactly the parashiyot that we read during a regular calendar year. In Siman Taf Chaf Het, Maran says, always Parashat Tzav will be read before Pesach in a regular year, and Parashat Shemini will be read the Shabbat after. And he gives a remez when he says Pikdu upishu. Pikdu means Tzav, Pikod, commandment. Tzav et bnei Israel, Tzav et bnei Aaron. Upishu means and make the Korban Pesach, make Pesach. So therefore, this week we have obviously Parashat Shemini. And Shemini actually is the 8th day, which is the first day where actually Avodah began. To be more precise, the Mishkan was actually open 7 days prior to this day. And Moshe Rabbeinu served as the Kohen Gadol for 7 days. That was called the 7 days of Miluim. It was more like a test run for the Mishkan. But the official opening day for the tabernacle, which is the first day that Korbanot were officially brought, was on the 8th day of that process, which happens to be Rosh Chodesh Nisan, and that's when Aaron HaKohen was installed as the first Kohen Gadol. And that's when service began. So if we want to trace back the roots of when Avodah begins, it's before the Beit HaMikdash. It's actually in our parasha, Vayhi Bayom HaShemini. That's the shortage of Avodah. So my analysis was that if we go and study this parasha correctly, we might be able to reveal a great secret regarding Avodah. Well, the Torah comes along and says, Ve'el Bnei Yisrael, I'm reading the beginning of the parasha, Pasuk Bet even, Direktet. Vayomer el Aharon, so God tells Aharon, take yourself an egel, these are different type of animals. Take a ram and bring it as a sacrifice. Tell the Jewish people, let them take a goat. Let them take also a egel, a calf, a kevis, a sheep. These are all different types of sacrifices. Shor, ayin, l'shlamim. Take a meal offering, a flour with all mixing with oil. Ki hayom, because today, on this day, Adonai nir'ah alechem. Because on this day, God has revealed himself to you. Revealed is past tense. Now it is true. On the day that they inaugurated the Mishkan, there was a revelation of the Shekhinah. I would have written the pasuk Ki Hayom Hashem Yid'eh Alechem, that God will, meaning after you bring the korbanot, then there's going to be a revelation. But our pasuk actually sounds like it's past tense. I found the Sforno on this. Sforno says Ki Hayom Adonai Nir'ah Alechem Kivar Nir'ah B'Maaseh Yedechem. So even before the korbanot, already the Shekhinah was present. Shne'emar uchvod Adonai maleh et mishkan. The presence of God was there before they brought the korbanot. And the Sforno says, therefore, v'ra'ui shetechabeduhu bekorban. Because the Shekhinah came, it's proper now to bring a korban, a sacrifice in honor of this revelation. So the Sforno learns it's past tense. Ki Adonai nir'ah, it happened already, and therefore the korban is a token of appreciation, let's say, or respect to the revelation of the Shekhinah. Very nice. All right, let's get to the Sidur. We have a Sidur. Beautiful. Let's get to the Sidur. Many years ago, thank you, Ernest, we gave Shi'urim on the Amidah. If you probably go back to them, you'll probably hear some of these things that we said then, but we're going to say it tonight, probably a little clearer, a little better. I want to go to the Berakah and the Amidah. The Berakah that talks about Avodah. Right after Shomei HaTefillah. V'reseh Adonai Eloheinu ba'amecha Yisrael. Fine. V'reseh Hashem Elokeinu ba'amecha Yisrael. God, you should warn us. You should be appeased with us. V'letfilatam she'eh. Tam she'eh and turn to their prayers. We're asking God, please, when we call on you, turn to us. She'eh, turn to us. So we're making an admission. We don't have the temple. We're asking you, God, to return Avodah. It's an amazing thing. We don't have to say return Torah. We don't have to say return Gimut Hasadim. We don't have Avodah. Then we say, there's a period there. Ve'ishei Yisrael utfilatam. The Ishei Yisrael is the fires of Israel. Ishei Yisrael is milashon esh, and the fires of Israel, which is korbanot, utfilatam, and their prayers. Mehera be'ahabat tqabel baratzon. Please, God, accept. When I'm reading this, I have a very strong question. You just told me that we don't have avodah. You're telling God, Hasheva avodah. Bring the avodah back. That means there's no avodah, there's no korbanot. So what does it mean, the Ishei Yisrael? There's no Ishei Yisrael. There's no fires, there's no mizbeach. Ishe Yisrael is a korban. Ishe reyach ni'u ala Hashem. If I was writing this beracha, I would have said, B'Hashem ba'avodah l'betecha, and in the meantime, tefilatam tekabel beratzon. Until then, tefilatam beratzon. But it doesn't say that. So mamash, there's a contradiction from the Resha to the Sefer of the beracha. B'Hashem ba'avodah l'betecha, meaning there's no avodah. And therefore, the Ishe Yisrael tefilatam, except Ishe Yisrael tefilatam. If Ishe Yisrael, Baruch Hashem, I found this question. The question is actually brought in the Tur. Rabbeinu Yaakov Ba'al HaTurim, right over here in Siman Kuf Chaf or the Hayim. And I'll read it. Ve'ishe Yisrael, Rabotai, advice. Anybody that wants to see beautiful interpretations to the Berachot, read the Tur. Every Berachah has an explanation. We wouldn't look at it because we think the Tur is only a halachic book, but he also gave a perush to the tefillah. And here's no exception. Ve'ishe Yisrael, ve'af al pi she'en ata avodah, even though there's no avodah, mitpalelim ala tefillah, שהיא במקום הקורבן, שתתקבל ברצון לפני השם יתברך. So the first explanation, he says, Ishe Yisrael is really not the fire of the korban. It's a tefillah, it's a prayer. Maybe they're telling you should pray with a fire. You should pray with a kavanah, or the bren. So therefore, the Ishe Yisrael means the tefillah of Klal Yisrael. It should be a tefillah with kavanah. Midrash, but then he goes to Midrash, and here's the secret. Yesh Michael Sar Gadol. There's an angel. The angel is called Michael. Michael is called Sar Gadol. He's the administering angel who actually is the Kohen Gadol in heaven. I didn't know this. I knew that we have a Kohen Gadol on earth. But the Tur tells me that he's the administering angel in heaven. And what does he do in heaven? What kind of Kohen Gadol? What kind of sacrifices? Umakriv nishmatan shel tzaddikim ala mizbeach shel ma'ala. There's an altar in the heavens. And there's sacrifices on this altar. They're not animal sacrifices like the one on earth. From time to time, there's certain neshamot that are very pristine, they're very precious. These are called neshamot of the tzaddikim. And only according to God's wisdom, these neshamot are taken from earth and they're given to Michael. And Michael puts these neshamot on the mizbeach. Obviously, they're not consumed. Putting them on the mizbeach means they become, like the word korban, karov. They become very attached and close to Kadosh Baruch Hu. And that's the way he serves in heaven. Ve'al zeh tiknu ve'ishe Yisrael. So the Tur understands that when it says ve'ishe Yisrael, it's referring to the korbanot that are still being brought today, not on earth. So ve'ishe Yisrael that are being brought al yedeh Michael. Utfilatam is the tefillot that are happening on earth. That's the way he understands it. Only issue is the Beit Yosef comes along and says that where did the Tur get this from, this hadush of Michael in the heavens? Ken katvu betosafot. It's a tosfot at the end of Menachot. Ulfi ze hachi perusho. So the Beit Yosef explains ve'ishe Yisrael kilomar anshe Yisrael. The word Ishe, according to the Beit Yosef, does not mean fire. Ishe is like Melashon Ish. So when you say Ishe, it's like short for Anshe, which means, and the people of Israel, the Anshe Yisrael, who are these Anshe Yisrael? HaNikrabim, that are being sacrificed. Al Yedeh Michael. So the Anshe Yisrael, that the human sacrifices that are delivered to Michael, the Kohen Gadol in heaven, tikabel beratzon. Yeah, or that's the Korban, exactly. And not everybody gets on that Mizbeach. After being the Shema, the big tzaddik, and God takes it and says, oh, this is for you, Michael. And it seems that it's mechaper, that it gives an atonement for Klai Yisrael. When they say tzaddik passes away, it's kapara for the door. What's the pshat? It's kapara for the door. Michael puts it on the Mizbeach, and it makes a certain tikkun. So therefore, we're praying that when those Ishei Yisrael, when those Anshei Yisrael are delivered to the Mizbeach Shel Ma'ala, to the heavenly altar, and Michael puts them on the Mizbeach to Kabel Beratzon. I did see some take out the word Mehera, because Mehera would as if to say quickly, and we don't want the tzaddikim to die. So therefore, they don't have the word. Some siddurim do not have the word of Ishei Yisud Filatam. Some have it. Tekabel beratzon. They don't have mehira be'abat beratzon. Our tefillot, we want them to be accepted mehira, but we don't want the tzaddikim to go on the mizbeach in heaven mehira. So that depends on your minhag. And then he comes along and he says, the Bet Yosef, or maybe we could say, יהיה בלשון אישי ריח ניחוח. ואישי ישראל ותפילתם, אישי means the fire. What do you mean fire? כלומר, קורבנות ישראל, it's a קורבן, דהיינו נפשותיהם שהן עצמם נקרבות על ידי מיכאל. Oh, so he learns it, there's a fire in heaven. So then, אישי ישראל, not אישי ריח ניחוח להשם, that fire from the nafshot of Israel should be accepted. Fine. So that's an unbelievable explanation. We're going to pray our beat, have a kavanah and tefillah. So therefore, my point is, when I saw this, it comes out that there is still avodah today. It's not the same avodah that we had in the olden days in the Bet HaMikdash, but there's still service. That service, however, is taking place in the Bet HaMikdash Shel Ma'ala al Yedei Michael Kohen Gadol. So when the Mishnah says Pirke Avot, ala Torah ala Avodah, there is Avodah today. It's just not the Avodah that we're accustomed to. It's the Avodah of Ishei Yisrael. The question we have over here is, when did Michael become installed as the official Kohen Gadol in heaven? It's a historical question. When did this happen? Which means I know when Aharon was installed in our parasha. Aharon became the first Kohen Gadol in Parashat Shemini. But when did Michael get elected or nominated to this job? So I found a very, very interesting Ba'al HaTurim. Incredible Ba'al HaTurim. In Parashat Vayetzeh, when Yaakov Avinu is running away from his brother, Esav, so he makes a condition, or he makes a prayer with God. And he says, in the beginning of Parashat Vayetzeh, Perek Chav Zayin, so he says, V'natan li lechem ne'echol, ubeged lilbosh. That if you'll give me clothes to wear, so when I make some money, I'll give you back 10%. So Yaakov Avinu mentions the word lilbosh. Comes the Ba'al HaTurim, and he says that there's only one other time in the Torah that it says the word lilbosh. And where is that? Exactly. In Parashat, in Sefer Vayikra, lilbosh et habegadim. When it talks about the Kohen Gadol, it says that Kohen Gadol wears the begadim. So the Ba'al HaTurim sees a connection between Yaakov's lilbosh and the beginning of the Kohen Gadol. What's the connection? Melamed she Yaakov haya Kohen Gadol. In his time, he was the Kohen Gadol. Well, actually, when he bought the birthright from his brother, he was a Bechor. He buys the birthright, and the birthright comes with the Kehuna, like it says in Bereshit. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu leMichael. So God tells the angel Michael, Ata asita Yaakov Kohen Gadol sheli Ba'al Mum, shehu soleya al Yerecho. Yaakov Avinu at a certain point became blemished. That was when the angel gave him a shot in his hip. Yaakov was soleya, he was limping. The Balaturim holds that that's a blemish that renders him unfit to be a Kohen Gadol. I don't know why they blame Michael for this. I always understood it was the Samech Mem, the Satan, that laid the deadly blow, unless you tell me that the claim against Michael was, why didn't you protect Yaakov from the deadly blow of the Samech Mem? But anyway, God has claims against Michael. You took my Kohen Gadol and you didn't give him protection. He left the Samech Mem Ba'almum. So therefore God says, Hayecha, she'ata sarich liyot Kohen Gadol lema'ala b'mkomo. You got to replace him now. I understand why that's such a punishment, but nonetheless, God says, you got rid of my Kohen Gadol, now there's an opening. Hazak Baruch, you got the job, Michael replaces Yaakov Abinu. That's my question. What do you mean? That's my question. The way I answered it is, Ulai, he doesn't tell me why. Ulai, he didn't protect Yaakov. Ulai is Epshat. Well, you're supposed to be his bodyguard. How'd you let the Satan come close to him? Lachen, ata pasalt et Kohen Gadol sheni, עכשיו אתה תהיה. So according to the Balaturim, he already was doing this from Parashat Vayetze. Put that on the side. I just wanted to bring it out because so many people are going to say, hey, what about that Balaturim? I'm aware of it. But that's not the Mahalach we're taking tonight. I found an Aruch HaShulchan, our great Rabbi Aruch HaShulchan, in Siman Kuf Chaf, Rabbi Epstein. And he comes along and says, the Michael hu Kohen Gadol lema'ala, כשם שאהרון היה כהן גדול למטה. Good. So there's parallel Kohanim. And then he adds, וכשנתמנה אהרון לכהן גדול, אז נתמנה גם מיכאל למעלה. Oh. Aruch HaShulchan says it didn't happen in Parashat Vayetze. Aharon was nominated on earth, and simultaneously there was a nomination taking place in heaven. There's Yerushalayim Shel Mata, there's Yerushalayim Shel Ma'ala. And therefore, as Aharon was getting his coronation ceremony on earth, in heaven there's a parallel world. And in that parallel world, Michael was getting his inauguration to become Kohen Gadol. So it happened at the same time. Where did the Aruch HaShulchan know that it happened in our parasha? So I found a beautiful Rosh. The Rosh ala Torah, over here in our parasha, he has a pasuk in Tehillim. The pasuk in Tehillim is in chapter 133. Kashemen hatov ala rosh, yored ala zakan, zekan Aharon. It says like the good oil, that's referring to the oil of anointment. The oil that dripped down the beard of Aharon. So ask the rosh, maze zekan. How many beards did Aharon have? It should say, Kashemen hatov, hayored al zekan Aharon. Why does it say, hayored al zakan, zekan? So he says, Lacha, lama ne'emar shnei pa'amim, zekan, ela habet meshuchim shenimshehu be'oto shemen. Because there were two people that day that were inaugurated with the oil, Michael lema'ala v'Aharon lemata. Oh, so therefore it was zekan. There was a double ceremony. Michael lema'ala and Aharon lemata. If that's the case, the Aruch HaShulchan comes along and he finds a remez in the pasuk for this. The pasuk says, "V'shor ba'ayin l'shlamim, v'zbawach lefnei Adonai, u'mincha b'dolah b'shemen. Ki hayom, today, Adonai nir'a alechem. He says the word nir'ah is the same letters as Aharon, and Alechem is the same letters as Michael. And therefore, Kihayom, today we have a double kehuna. Today it's Nir'ah Alechem. Nir'ah on earth, the Aharon, Alechem, the Lemala, the Michael. That's an incredible revelation that we have over here. I found in the Zohar Kadosh, incredible piece of Zohar. It's also brought down in the Sefer Sheminah Lahmo. This explains a lot. In order to inaugurate a Mizbeach, you need first to put the oil. Whatever the ceremony is, there's special ways to consecrate the Mizbeach. But then you need to bring inaugural sacrifices. On the first day of the Mishkan, they brought many sacrifices that were only brought on that day. Those are called Kodshe Sha'ah. These are sacrifices for the moment. These are inaugural sacrifices. So the Zohar Kadosh says, how did Michael, who opened the Mizbeach in heaven, you need korbanot? So the Zohar Kadosh says, that's why Nadav Avihu had to pass away on the first day of the inauguration of the Mishkan, because they were the tzaddikim that needed to inaugurate the Bet HaMikdash Shel Ma'ala. They were the korbanot that established Michael's Mizbeach. It was inaugurated with neshamot of the tzaddikim. You couldn't get too big a tzaddikim, like the pasuk says, B'krobai Kadesh, the ones that are closest to me. Moshe said, I thought it was going to be me and you, Aharon. Means to go on that Mizbeach, Michael, you need nuclear neshamot. So Zohar Kadosh says, Nadav Avihu were taken. It was a pure korban, a pure sacrifice, and now you have a double inauguration of Mizbehot, korbanot of animals. Lemata ve'ishei Yisrael, meaning ve'anshei Yisrael. The tzaddikim were put on the fiery Mizbeach, bekorbatam lifnei Adonai, as the pasuk says, when they were brought lifnei Hashem on the Mizbeach of Michael. Incredible piece of Zohar. So therefore, the mitah of Nadav Abihu, it's a tragedy. There's nothing to talk about. But it's a tragedy that serves a tremendous purpose and a tremendous function that establishes for the future the concept of mitat tzadikim and its kapara, and the kapara. Oh, it also explains the Vayidom Aharon, which I'd like to explain for a moment. This is the Vayidom Aharon's reaction. And this is a very, very, very important yesod. The holy books tell us that nothing can happen in heaven unless it's generated on earth. Heaven only reacts to our behavior. The Zohar Kadosh always refers to itaruta diltata. Borei Olam says you control everything. Based on your behavior and your action, it'll create a reaction in the heaven. Heavens, like the Baal Shem Tov say, are like a mirror. Hashem tzelecha. God says, I am your shadow. I shadow you. Whatever you do, I will follow. So therefore, it's not enough to put korbanot on a mizbeach. As we learned in Pesachim, we just finished it in the daf. We'll learn it in Zebachim and Menachot. More integral, I should say most integral, than putting the korban on the mizbeach is the kavanah of the kohen, is the thoughts. The easy part is to slaughter it and throw it on the mizbeach. But if the kohen does not have pure thoughts at the time of the sacrifice, it can render the sacrifice pigul. Even if he thinks something as innocent as, I want to eat the meat past its time, or I want to eat the meat past its boundaries, or other thoughts that might render it pigul, the Torah says lo yiratzeh. So the Kohen has to be very careful not to have any bad thoughts. There was once a group of human sacrifices. It happened in Kavno at the 9th fort. There was a great tzaddik, the student of the Hafetz Chaim, called Rabbi Wasserman, Hashem Yimkom Damav, the chief rabbi of the yeshiva in Baranovich. And he was there with his Talmidim, and the Nazis gathered them up, and they lined them up in order to execute them. Before the execution, Rabbi Chanan called his Talmidim, and he told them, we are now going to be human sacrifices. Our souls are going to be placed on the Mizbeach of Michael Kohen Gadol, Sar Apotroposh Yisrael. Our sacrifice will atone for the Jewish people. And if we do this correctly, it'll allow the Jewish people to survive this and continue to study Torah and move on to better times. Therefore, he warned his students. The easy part is to get shot. The difficult part is not to have any bad thoughts, not to question God, not to have any anger, not to have any claims. We have to mekadesh Shem Shamayim with this intention that our korban should be pure for Klal Yisrael. We have an example of Ishei Yisrael. We have an example in modern time where tzaddikim understood that they're sacrificing, and that's what happened. And they made the beracha. He actually learned with them Harambam, Hilchot, Kiddush Hashem, how it's supposed to be done. And then Yatzu Nishmatam, like the neshamot of Nadav Avihu, B'Klushav Tahara. Michael received those neshamot of Rabbi Chanan and his students and brought them on the Korban, and the Korban was accepted. When Michael brings those Korbanot in heaven, if Has v'Shalom Aharon is the owner of that Korban. Nadav Avihu are his Korbanot. If the owner of that Korban, who incidentally happens to be the Kohen Gadol, if he has Has v'Shalom, a bad thought, if he has an idea of anger or questioning or bitterness or claim, lo yiratzeh. And therefore the Torah comes along and says, the Mesirut Nefesh, the great sacrifice. There was 2 korbanot brought on that day, by the way. One korban of Nadav Abihu and the other of Aharon's reaction. That's a korban. That's a tremendous self-sacrifice to be able to stay focused. And these are his 2 tzaddikim, his 2 children, on the happiest day of Aharon's life. And Aharon knows what type of control he has to have in his mind, and in order not to, Has v'Shalom, if even one, listen, on the Mizbeach of Michael, it doesn't tolerate even an iota of mistake. You cannot be 99% on that Mizbeach. To get on God's Mizbeach, it has to be 153% kavanah. If Aharon would have been 99% good and 1%, what happened? Finished. Pasul, then who knows what would have happened? It wouldn't have worked. And the Torah comes along and says, Vayidom Aharon. Abotai, there's a big hatush here. Aharon's midah over here is the inyan that he accepted it. He accepted the gezerah b'kadosh baruch hu. This is the midah of the tzaddikim. The midah of the tzaddikim is they're silent. The tzaddikim are quiet. One time I was giving a shiur in the Torah Center, many years ago. I was a kid, just starting giving shiurim, the amateur. And it was this time of year, the Holocaust memorial time. And I started to talk a little about the Shoah, the Holocaust. I'm telling stories, I'm explaining, who knows what I was saying. He was an old man in the Torah Center. A survivor. He had the numbers. He had the numbers on his arm. And he called me to the side after the shoot. He says, "You give a good shia." He says, "But don't talk about this. What are you talking about? What do you even know about this Holocaust? What do you know about anything? You were there. You saw it. You better for you just to talk about something else. The best talk on this, don't say anything. Anything you say is extra." Wow, good Musar. And he survived it. We don't. You're giving explanations. You're talking too much. You're talking too much. Hashem yimkom damam. End. The great tzaddikim, they have tremendous emunah and they accept. Oh. The holy books tell us that when Aharon remained silent, it allowed Michael now to do what he had to do in heaven. That means Aharon's reaction not only showed us his emunah, but it made the tikkun for that mizbeach, which tells us a tremendous hadush that for that mizbeach to work, it needs the ingredients of Vayidom. Hashem should protect us, but when there's tragedies in the world, we had a lot of korbanot from the past year in the pandemic. The Kohen Gadol in heaven's working overtime this year. A lot of tzaddikim, the Ishei Yisrael, a lot of Ishei Yisrael. But the Ishei Yisrael only work when those that are down on earth have acceptance. But Hat Shalom, if the Korban is not brought. So I saw the holy book say that Aaron is still doing his job. Aaron is still doing his job. I saw one sefer, it said that originally Michael's job was the advocate for Bnei Yisrael, to speak advocacy for Bnei Yisrael, to speak, positive for Bnei Yisrael. He's called Sarva Apotropos Shel Yisrael. And Aaron's job was to bring the korbanot. He said after the Churban Beit HaMikdash, it switched. Now Michael's job is to bring the korbanot, and Aaron's job is to speak on behalf of Klal Yisrael. So therefore, the Kohanim are still working. That's why the pasuk says, "Ki Adonai nir'a alechem." It doesn't say nir'a alechem. The Targum explains not in the past tense, like I told you. Ki Adonai nir'a alechem. If you look at the Targum, the way he says it, he says, "Arum yomaden ikar shekinta mitgale lechom." Mitgale means present. Mitgale, because Aaron and Michael are still present. This is a great revelation. It means when the Mishnah Pirke tells us avodah, there is still avodah today. It's not the conventional avodah that you used to. If somebody would have come and tell you, Aaron's still here, well, Aaron's still working. And there's a Beit HaMikdash in heaven, and you need the two Kohanim to do their jobs. Ishmatam shel tzaddikim. Oh, but what does it depend on? The key of this whole is the power not to question the gezerot of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I found an amazing midrash. The midrash is questioning, where did Michael get his name? If your name is Michael, you'd be curious. Where does that name come from, Michael? But we know El is automatic. Oh. How do you know this? It's a good guess. I mean, there's a lot of Pesukim. I'll quote you the Midrash. Oh, okay. I'll give it to you, Mr. Midrash. I have it now. I'll give it to you. The Midrash is in Bamidbar. Midrash Rabbah. Midrash Rabbah, Bamidbar. Perek Bet. Perek Bet, I think Yod. ולמה נקרא שמו מיכאל? בשעה שעברו ישראל בים. When the Jewish people crossed the Yam, Patach Moshe b'shira. Moshe Rabbeinu opened up with a song. And what did he say? Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai. He asked, Mi chamocha? Who is like you? Mishsiyem et Torah, when he finished the Torah, he answered his question. Sometimes you ask a question in one generation, you don't answer it till 40 years later. He asked the question when he was 80. Mi chamocha, who is like you? Ba'elim Hashem. When he was 120, what did he say at the end of the Torah? En ka'el yeshurun. En ka'el. So therefore, as a result, we get the name Micha El. Micha Mocha. Short for that is Micha El. Only question is, what has it got to do with Moshe, the name of Michael? So I saw in the Perush of the Maharzu on this Midrash, he says, Sarich Ayun. Ech nikra Michael al she'amar Moshe. So he says, Ach girsata pesikta. There's a different text in the Midrash, a more precise one. Lama nikra shemo Michael, שבשעה שעברו ישראל את הים, פתח ואמר מיכמוך בעלים. Michael said it. So therefore, he's the one that said Michamocha, and at the end of the Torah answered Michael. So by the way, to your question, Michamocha and Kael, so therefore they nicknamed them Michael. That's where the name comes from. He coined the phrase Michamocha Ba'ilim. So I went and studied this pasuk, Michamocha Ba'ilim. What does it mean, Michamocha Ba'ilim? So the Midrash says something incredible. Don't read the word Elim. Michamocha Ba'ilimim. God says, or the Midrash says, God, there's nobody like you in the fact that you are Elim. You are silent. What does it mean you're silent? That a Kadosh Baruch Hu, even though you see all the things that the Goyim are doing to your children, you don't react. God is patient. Borei Olam sees all the Goyim atheists. He doesn't kill them. He controls himself. He sees all the injustices. A regular human king, if somebody goes out of line, a second later, he executes him. Baruch Hu's patient. The Rambam writes that we have an obligation to emulate HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's why in Tehillim, the Jewish people are called what? Mizmor LeDavid. Havul Adonai Bnei Elim. Says the Midrash, what does it mean, Bnei Elim? Bnei Elimim. That the Jewish people have the midah of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Just like Micha Mocha Ba'ilim, we are called Bnei Elim. Which means what? Elimim. Even though we see the world so against us, and even though we see so many things that we don't understand, and even though we see so many Chas v'Shalom things that seem injustice, Sadiq Vera'lo, Klal Yisrael sees themselves being tormented for so many generations. And what's Bnei Yisrael? And we're called Bnei Elimim. We're considered. And where did Michael get his name from? Michael is the one that reveals this concept. Where did Michael get the inyan of being silent, of accepting that koach was given to him by Aharon HaKohen? When Aharon HaKohen was Vayidom on earth, that gives the power of Michael. It gave him his name. Why, out of all the Pesukim, does Michael react? Michael says, where did Aaron get this power from? This is a koach from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The fact that you could see such injustices and still remain silent, Michael was impressed by such a thing. But Michael gets his koach from where? From the tzaddik, from Aharon HaKohen. from the Vayidom. Oh, if that's the case of Botai, there's no coincidence. When we traveled in the Midbar, this is a side point. When we traveled in the Midbar, you know that we traveled 42 stations. It's like the F train. 42 stations till we got to Eretz Israel. Right? They didn't have express. We took the local. So do you know the stations? When we came out of Mitzrayim, so 3 days later, that means right after Kiryat Yamsuf, 3 days after Pesach, we got to Marah. And then the next station after Marah, which is probably today we arrived there, Parashat Shemini, we left Marah. Where did we get? Vayavo'u Elima. We got to a place called Elima. And the tzaddikim say that always right after Pesach, we got to Elima. Elima is Melashon what? Vayavo Elim. We got to Elim. What does it mean after Pesach we got to Elim? Because once already we get to Parashat Shemini, which is always read after Pesach, that already we got the koach of Micha Mocha Ba'elim. We got the koach of being Elimim. The Torah is telling us the place that we went to reminds us of the koach. And where did we get that strength from? The strength came from Aharon HaKohen of Vayidom. And that emunah that we get from Aharon is for all the future generations. Heveh metalmidav shel Aharon. That's what the Mishnah says. And one of the things of Talmidav shel Aharon is he's from Elim. That's his destination. That's his location. That's his place. Aharon is Elim, meaning Elim. And who is the angel that represents in heaven that midah? Michael. And that's why La'atid lavo, before Mashiach comes, there's a pasuk in Daniel in Pirke Yud Bet. Uba'etahi, that's referring to the times of Mashiach. Ya'amod Michael Hasar Gadol, the great general Sar Gadol Michael is going to rise. Ha'omed al bnei amecha, v'haita et Sarah. It's going to be a difficult time. Says the Mitzudat David, what is Michael going to do? The Bakesh Rahamim al Yisrael. Why? Ki hu haragil la'amod tamid lelamed sanigoria al Yisrael. That he's always the one that speaks advocacy for Bnei Yisrael. Where did he get that midah from? Evem et tamidav shel Aharon, ohev shalom, verodev shohev et haberiyot. Aharon always went out to the people. And therefore, his midah directly affects Michael. And therefore, la'atid lavo. And what is Michael's advocacy going to be? Look at all Bnei Yisrael, what they went through throughout the generations. Look what happened in Europe, 6 million Jews. Today, one of our members, Rabbi Moshe, sent me an unbelievable clip of the former chief rabbi of Israel, a survivor, Rabbi Lau. Maybe some of you saw it. They were interviewing him, and they questioned Rabbi Lau, how is it possible that after such a atrocity, what the Germans did to European Jewry, that we could still keep Shabbat and still believe in God? And the rabbi came along as a survivor, and he said, it's not enough what they did to us, but now you want to give them another victory? What do you mean to say? He said, what were they doing, the Germans? They weren't only coming against us, they were coming against God. There's no Jews, then there's no Judaism, and there's no Torah, and there's no God. And therefore, after it's all over, should I give them the satisfaction and the victory that I turn my back to Shabbat? That's what they wanted. Then they get another victory. Not only did they take away my bodies, but they got what they wanted. That even though we killed the Germans after the war was over, but they succeeded. They caused Klaiset to forget. He said, I won't give them that victory. He says, I don't need to know Sadiq Vera'lo and all that. That all doesn't bother me. He says, we have to have faith in God because that we show the Germans, you failed. That's the only way we can show them you didn't succeed. And that's what Michael is going to tell God. Michael, who's the Sarba Potapot Israel, who's Ohevet HaBeriot, like Aaron, who has the Midah of Aaron, he's called Michael, Michamocha Ba'elim, Be'elimim, Michael gets the Midah Ba'yidot from Aaron. And that's his advocacy to Klal Yisrael. They were silent. They didn't question. Thousands of years of Galut, and they're still coming to the Bet Knesset. And they didn't forget you. And with all the troubles that they had, they still serve you. And when they run towards you. And they didn't turn their back. And they're still observing to the best of their ability. And the Kadosh Baruch Hu is going to hear that claim of Michael. And Rabbi comes along and says, at that time over there, Ba'itahi Yimalet Amecha. The Jewish people are going to be relieved. They're going to be saved. Kol Nimsa Hakatuv Besefer. It comes over here and he says that the Jewish people are going to be redeemed and the Mashiach is going to save them as a result. And therefore, the Avodah does exist. It just exists in a different form. It might not be the Avodah of the Beit HaMikdash, but it's very relevant. And that's what we say in the Tefillah. Bring the Avodah back to Beit HaMikdash. But in the meantime, the Ishei Yisrael that's taking place in the heaven, Michael Kohen Gadol, Utfilatam, which is the Tefillah of Aharon HaKohen. Combine those two Kohanim with the advocacy of Aharon and the Korbanot of Michael, and then we come along and say, that God should give us the ability to see, to bring us back to Zion and mercy. מיכאל הכהן גדול, כי אדוני נראה עליכם, נראה אותיות אהרון, עליכם אותיות מיכאל. The Torah is coming to say, כי היום, even today, there's still Kohanim Gedolim working for you, although in a virtual world, in a different understanding. And the key is what? Korban with emunah. And together with that, B'ezrat Hashem, Borei Olam will send us the Goel, the Merabi Yamenu. Amen.
Amen. Baruch Baruch.
לפי הקרבה להם, נאמר, מחפש למען צדקו, יגדיל תורה וידיר, יתקדם.